All right, Federico, we are back for another in our series of summertime OS preview interviews. I'm pretty excited. I mean, it's been fun. We had a good time talking to Marcos Tanaka a few weeks ago, and today we're going to speak to Gui Rambo, who we actually talked to last year, but I really wanted to talk to Gui this year again because I know that he's working on some things that are very relevant to what's going on what went on at WWDC this year.
That's right. And I really wanted to talk to Guy to get a better sense of some of the announcements, some of the APIs, and especially the SharePlay stuff and its FaceTime integration, because that's, like, personally speaking, I could use this very conversation as because I need content for my review.
It's research.
It's research for me, and I need to be... SharePlay is one of the things that I'm struggling with. We'll talk about this later on, but I think I could use Guy's experience and the fact that he's been looking into this sort of stuff as additional research for my story. So yeah, I'm excited about this one. Let's dive in.
We're here today with Guilherme Rambo, the developer of AirBuddy and a whole bunch of other apps, which we'll hear a little bit about in a little bit. But I wanted to say welcome to the show, Guy. How you doing today?
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm doing great. How are you guys?
We're doing all right. You know, before we dig too deep into the individual APIs and some of the real nitty-gritty details, why don't you tell everybody who's listening a little bit about yourself and your apps and just reintroduce yourself. I know we talked to you last year, but there's probably some people who might have missed that episode.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Gui Rambo. I do AirBuddy, as you mentioned, and I also do a bunch of other apps, including Chibi Studio, which is an app for iOS. I also do the unofficial WWDC app for macOS and a bunch of other open source projects. I also happen to co-host StackTrace on 9to5Mac.
All right, Guy. So I'm so busy working on my iOS and iPadOS 15 review at the moment. And one of the things I'm struggling with, and actually part of the reason why I really wanted to have you on the show, is the SharePlay section of the review. So I want to talk about this new feature coming to FaceTime in iOS, iPadOS 15, all the updates later this year. And very high level, this is a way for participants in a FaceTime call to share different kinds of content and sort of have different kinds of activities together. So in music, you will be able to listen to music together. In TV, you can watch a movie together. And third-party developers can plug into this framework as well. So I wanted to ask you, what kind of opportunities do you think SharePlay will open up for developers like yourself?
Yeah, it's quite flexible in what it allows you to do. One thing I was worried about when I first saw the announcement was that it would be this thing just for things like Disney Plus and Netflix and other services like that to implement. But it's nothing like that. It's actually quite flexible. So even if you have a media app, but it doesn't use like all of the system AV foundation stuff, you can still plug that into SharePlay. But even beyond that, any type of experience that could be shared between users live on FaceTime can be done through SharePlay. So basically, what SharePlay allows us to do is to create this data stream that's shared between multiple participants in a FaceTime call. And that's also, at the same time, it's something that expands the functionality, but it's also a limitation because you cannot keep that alive beyond the context of a FaceTime call. So if I want to, say, share a document editing experience in a FaceTime call with my friends, if one of them leaves the call, they basically, by default, they're out of the sharing session, so they can't edit that document anymore with their friends. But I do see a few ways how developers could basically fix that. So you could kind of like start an experience on FaceTime, but keep going beyond the FaceTime call. because you can basically exchange arbitrary data between the participants. You, as the developer, has that ability. So it will depend on the creativity of developers as to the depth of how this is implemented. But I do think it's a very well thought out framework, and I think we'll see some interesting experiences on top of it. Just not sure how big of a size of implementations we'll see. It might be the next iMessage app store, but it might just be this cool thing that some apps implement.
Mm-hmm. And just for context, so this kind of collaboration is different from the sort of CloudKit-based collaboration. Like collaborating in real time in SharePlay is different from, say, sharing a note in Apple Notes, right? And collaborating over iCloud.
Yeah, that's correct. So this collaboration will exist within the FaceTime environment and while that FaceTime session lasts. But there's nothing stopping a developer from using the FaceTime call and the SharePlay API as a means to exchange the data and credentials necessary to start another type of shared experience that will then outlive the FaceTime session. So it's technically possible for developers to do other types of shared experiences that basically outlive the FaceTime call.
Got it. So I have to assume you've been playing around with it so far. How have you been using SharePlay? What are the kind of things that you can share right now that you've been experimenting with?
I've done actually four things, I think. So the first one was a simple demo that I made for wwdcbysandel.com, which is the WWDC by Sandel and Friends website that I run with John Sandel every WW. And I made a little sample app where you can do stuff over SharePlay. I also made a sample app for Jeff over at the 9 to 5 Mac YouTube channel where he was able to demo SharePlay because when he recorded the video, it was on beta 1 and none of Apple's apps had SharePlay yet. So I made a little video playing app where he could demonstrate the feature. I actually shipped a beta of my unofficial WWDC app for macOS with SharePlay, so you can go to the GitHub repo and download the beta, and if you can watch WW sessions with friends. And I'm actually working on getting SharePlay implemented in Chibi Studio, where you can have your friends in a FaceTime call and you can all create a little cute character together. So that's what I've been working on.
That sounds really cool. You know, you mentioned discoverability and whether this might end up being kind of like the next iMessage store. And I know that's something that Federico and I have been talking about and thinking about. What are your thoughts on that? Because I guess there are a couple of different aspects of it. One is the fact that FaceTime has to be involved. As you said, you could probably you can pass that off beyond FaceTime and not, beyond that environment. But the fact that it's tied to FaceTime and there, I don't know how do you expect people will discover these things? Because I guess there are two concerns there. One is discoverability, and the other is being tied to FaceTime.
Yeah, so I think many developers will take advantage of the API that allows you to know whether the user is currently on a FaceTime call. So apps are able to get a signal when there's an active FaceTime call so that you can put up a button or like put a dialogue that says, hey, I see that you're on a FaceTime call. Would you like to share your experience with your friends or something like that? So that's definitely one avenue for discoverability. I'm pretty sure that after you've done a SharePlay session once in a given app, every time you open that app while in a FaceTime call, the system itself will offer you to start a SharePlay session. So those are the two main ways of discoverability that I see right now. And we're talking beta 2 here, so of course this could change before the release. But yeah, those are the ways that I see discoverability happening. I think it's fairly discoverable. It will rely on people opening apps while on a FaceTime call. So who knows how frequent that is, but I guess if you are on a FaceTime call and you want to, I don't know, show something to your friend on another app, then the app will offer that. So I think it's fairly discoverable for people who use FaceTime.
Yeah, I think it explains too why Apple is so all in on it with FaceTime and the TV shows, movies, music, that kind of thing, because those are the kinds of common use cases that people might want to try out initially, and then they'll realize that, yeah, I can do this with some of my other apps too.
Yeah, and it's that simple to implement. Like for apps who are using the AV Foundation API, which is the standard playback system from Apple, it's like very, very little code. I was able to do it on my WWDC app in like an hour. Of course, it's a beta, so it could change, but like it took me more time to figure out where to put the button on screen than it took to actually implement the feature. So it's that simple for media playback apps.
Yeah, I'm not surprised you say that, I guess, because I have seen some other developers who I've spoken to doing some very quick betas, we're only on beta 2 of the OS, and I'm already seeing people putting together things, and I know now Apple is taking submissions in test flight for these, so we should be seeing more of them. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Concepts. Sketch, note, and explore endless ideas with Concepts' Infinite Canvas app for iPad. Draw in designer Copic colors with liquid pens and brushes, and organize images, text, and sketches into visual mood boards. Used by creative professionals for visual thinking, note-taking, team communication, storyboarding, product design, and architectural planning, Concepts lets you sketch and share your ideas in the moment. Everything you draw in Concepts is a flexible, editable vector. Nudge and edit and reorganize your ideas with natural finger gestures. Drag and drop images and objects onto the canvas for fast ideation and reference. Use layers and grid layouts to organize your work. Mark up PDF documents and apply real-world scale for professional design projects. Export and share standard high-res and vector file types for flexible work between teams and apps. Concepts' built-in presentation mode lets you connect to others for live sharing and graphics-based discussions. Whiteboard virtually with teams and clients using apps like Zoom, and then instantly share your discussion. The app comes free as a basic sketching tool with the ability to unlock 200-plus libraries of brushes, objects, and surfaces via a subscription or a one-time payment. To learn more about Concepts, visit their website today at concepts.app. MacStories readers can enjoy a special 1-month extended free trial when they sign up for an annual subscription. Get a month of infinite creativity before your ever build. So again, to learn more, go to concepts.app. Our thanks to Concepts for their support of the show. Let me switch over, Guy, to shortcuts on the Mac, which is something that I'm personally super excited about. I've been a longtime shortcuts user on the iPad and iPhone, and it's always been frustrating to me not to have that ability on the Mac. What do you think that this is going to do for developers who, maybe already have an app on the iPhone or the iPad and are thinking about coming to the Mac for the first time, or able to implement those shortcuts they maybe have on those other platforms on the Mac now too?
I think it's fantastic. I'm super happy that it's happening. I have so many ideas for shortcuts on the Mac. I've been doing some stuff for AirBuddy, which of course I'll be sharing more with you and with the listeners as things progress, but I'm super excited for the feature. And yeah, I agree that this is a great opportunity for iOS and iPadOS developers. They can bring their apps over to the Mac. There are many apps where if you don't have shortcuts, they kind of don't make much sense, where the app is basically a means to empower shortcuts or to do something cool with shortcuts. So I think that's really cool. But something that excites me the most about shortcuts coming to the Mac is being able to plug Mac-specific features into shortcuts, because the Mac can do things that you can't do on other devices that have been able to run shortcuts so far. So you can do things such as running shell scripts from shortcuts, and you can think about all of the powers that a Mac app can have, which is a lot more than on iOS. And apps that have those powers can expose them through shortcuts in a simple way, where then users are able to take advantage of that. So I think it's great for existing iPad and iPhone apps, but it's even better for these more powerful Mac apps that have been taking advantage of what the Mac has to offer. And now this is all exposed through a simple interface with shortcuts.
Guy, do you think there's a potential scenario maybe down the road where all this work that Apple did for supporting scripting on the Mac, so having this sort of intercommunication between shortcuts and existing scripting technologies, do you feel like maybe there's a possibility of some of this scripting tech also becoming available on iOS and iPadOS, or is it just a compatibility layer for the previous automation features of macOS?
Well, I certainly hope that they are looking into it, because we do need that on iPad, even more on iPad than on iPhone. If it's going to become eventually a development environment, I think we do need the ability to do some shell scripting and things like that. So I certainly hope that Apple is doing something like that internally, and they have been thinking about it. I can look at the current state of things and say for sure whether that's something that's going to happen, but I certainly hope so. We see now with the new Swift Playgrounds, which we haven't seen in practice yet, but they have announced it. You'll be able to build entire apps in Swift Playgrounds, and that's great. And I think that's going to open up opportunities for many people who don't own a Mac, or they don't want to have a Mac, to be able to actually ship apps. But for most developers, shipping apps goes a lot beyond just the integrated environment of Xcode or Swift Playgrounds. And a lot of that has to do with being able to run these shell scripts and Ruby scripts and whatever other little command line tools that you have. So I look forward to the day where iPad gains some sort of terminal. So that's going to be cool.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. I think your point about what the shortcuts brings to the Mac in terms of existing Mac apps is an important one, because I think what we're seeing Apple do with shortcuts on the Mac is really creating a nice environment that's a two-way street, really. It's bringing things over from the iOS side, but it's also allowing existing apps both to create their own native shortcut actions, but also tap into this scripting layer that will allow them to people to get up and running with those apps regardless of whether they've done that yet. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, I think Apple was pretty clear during WWDC that shortcuts for the Mac is the future of automation on that platform. And that means that probably at some point Automator goes away in the future. But at the same time, Apple's been de-emphasizing various scripting languages over time. And I'm wondering how you think those things fit together, because one thing I'm curious about is whether you think Swift might actually become they might actually use some of the scripting that you can do with Swift as a replacement for things that have been done in the past, or whether you think some of these other scripting languages will make a comeback in the form of integrations with shortcuts.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I don't see AppleScript and JavaScript, which are the current automation languages, going away anytime soon. Mm-hmm. I think that's there's just so much stuff built on top of them that Apple would not feel comfortable just deleting the whole layer from the OS. And there's also quite a lot of stuff that internally works through Apple scripting. So I think that's gonna stay for a while. But I would love to see another option, which would be to use Swift as the scripting language. And there have been features added to Swift not that long ago where you can use Swift as more of a dynamic language rather than this very static, strongly typed language. And I think some of those features could enable the usage of Swift for scripting as we do with AppleScript and JavaScript.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Memberful. Monetize your passion with membership. Memberful allows you to build sustainable recurring revenue. It's the easiest way to sell memberships to your audience, and it's used by the biggest creators on the web. Memberful has everything you need to run a membership program, including custom branding, gift subscriptions, Apple Pay, free trials, private podcasts, and a whole lot more. On top of that, Memberful seamlessly integrates with the tools you already use. You've got full control and ownership of your audience, your brand, and your membership. Memberful also has a world-class support team ready to help you simplify your memberships and grow your revenue. They're passionate about your success, and you'll always have access to a real human. With Memberful, you always have full control and ownership over your audience, brand, and your membership. Payments go directly to your own Stripe account. We've been using Memberful for years for our Club Mac stories, and we absolutely love it. We're in control of the relationship with our members. It makes payments simple for customers too, and it supports everything we've ever wanted to offer to club members and a whole lot more. I don't know another service that would handle everything that we do on the club this well. Get started for free with no credit card required by going to memberful.com/appstories. Again, that URL, so they know you came from the show, is memberful.com/appstories. Our thanks to Memberful for all the things they've done for Club Mac Stories over the years and for supporting this show.
All right, Guy, let's switch gears, and I want to ask you, broadly speaking, what are some of the biggest opportunities that you see for third-party developers heading into the fall? Like, as a third-party developer yourself, where do you think you and others should be focusing your attention?
Well, of course, the focus will depend on what you're excited about. Personally, I really like the proposition of shortcuts on the Mac, as we've established. One area where I see a big opportunity for Mac apps with shortcuts is, so on iOS, you can define your own actions for shortcuts, and on the Mac, you can do the same as well, of course. But there's a missing piece of the puzzle for shortcuts, which is custom triggers. So I can't, as a developer, by default, implement custom triggers for shortcuts. But that's not the case on the Mac. And that is not actually a feature of shortcuts on the Mac. But if you think about it, Mac apps are able to run shortcuts from within the app. They can invoke shortcuts. And if you can have a Mac app that's always running, and you can see where I'm going there, you can have the user configure their own custom triggers for shortcuts in your app. And that's actually something that I am exploring for AirBuddy, where you can trigger shortcuts based off of the state of your devices, basically, which is not something that you can do on iOS. So I think there's quite a bit of opportunity there for Mac apps to think about what can be done on the Mac that cannot be done on iOS with shortcuts, thanks to the nature of the platform itself. And moving from that, of course, SharePlay, I think, is a big opportunity for developers. That's going to allow sharing experiences, and I think is also a great featuring opportunity. I think Apple is going to be looking for apps that have SharePlay integration to feature in the fall. So I think those would be my top two areas of focus.
You mentioned AirBuddy, which is your Mac utility for doing a bunch of things with wireless devices on Apple platforms, and especially AirPods. What have been some of the challenges in creating and developing AirBuddy over the past several months?
Yeah, sure. So it's, of course, the big challenge there is keeping up with devices. So I'm always looking for the rumors of new AirPods and things like that. And there's been a recent addition to the lineup, not the AirPods lineup, but the Beats lineup, which is the Beats Studio Buds. And they don't have the W1 or H1 chip, which is kind of weird. And due to that, they don't have the magical pairing stuff. So I'm currently waiting for my hardware unit to arrive so that I can develop better integration with the Studio Buds, given that they don't have all of the features that other headsets have. So I do face that sometimes, given that I'm always developing against Apple devices. And Monterey, the beta, actually changed some things where a bunch of stuff broke in AirBuddy, so I had to rush to fix some things, even though it's still a beta. But I have many users who are early adopters, so I had to kind of do a little bit of work there, and I actually had to open up like a sign-up form for the AirBuddy beta, which I didn't have before. It was all manual, so I had to automate some stuff there in order to handle the demand for beta testers on Monterey.
Let me ask you, Guy, about working with Bluetooth with the Mac, because I know Bluetooth has been a little flaky for me, especially with some of even, Apple's own keyboards and trackpads and mice and that kind of thing. What are they changing things under the hood on Bluetooth, and what's it like working with that stack on the Mac?
It's awful.
I can imagine. That's kind of what I thought you'd say. What are some of the issues?
Yeah, so Bluetooth by its nature is quite flaky. It's a very lossy communication technology, basically. You can't ever rely on something, on your telling something to be done and it actually arriving at the other end. So there's a lot of retrying and error checking and things like that you have to do. And of course, given that it's a wireless technology, the environment in which the user is in will affect the operation of things. So sometimes you have like a user that, because of like there's this weird third-party Bluetooth thing that's spamming Bluetooth packets into the air, things just don't work and they blame your app or something like that. So it's quite challenging to develop against such a flaky piece of technology. And the thing you mentioned is true. Apple, I don't know what's happening there, but I have a theory that maybe they've been trying to unify the Bluetooth stack between iOS and macOS because they've been different historically. So for Mac apps, they have access to what we call Bluetooth Classic, which is like the old Bluetooth before Bluetooth Low Energy. But on iOS, Bluetooth Classic has always been unavailable, basically. You can only use Bluetooth Low Energy. And because of that, the APIs are different, and the Bluetooth stacks have been historically very different between the platforms. But what I've been noticing more recently is that they seem to be moving them a little bit closer together, and I think the Mac is suffering because what they've been doing is making the Mac Bluetooth stack more similar to iOS, and yeah, we've been noticing what happens when they do that, because there's quite a bit of problems with Bluetooth on macOS, and I'm pretty sure it started with Big Sur and it got a little bit better, but then it got a bit worse again, and it just goes on and on. So I hope that at some point they'll be done with this transition and then we'll have the benefits of it.
All right, I have a very simple question for you, Guy. SwiftUI, good or bad?
It's really good. I like SwiftUI. I haven't been using it as much as I'd like to, but something that I noticed more recently is that, yeah, of course, there's a lot of stuff that gets fixed in SwiftUI where they fix a bug or they introduce a new feature, and you can only use that feature if you support iOS 14 or iOS 15, depending on the feature. So you can't back deploy basically. But at the same time, they have been fixing a lot of issues with the tooling itself. So with previews, with Xcode, and also the Swift syntax itself. So what I've been noticing is that even when I'm working on something that has to work all the way back to iOS 13, I'm able to use SwiftUI more comfortably now because the tools are so much better and debugging is so much better. So even though I can't use every shiny new feature of SwiftUI, I can only use what's safe to use in SwiftUI 1.0, basically. It's better because the tooling has gotten so much better over the time. So I'm super excited about SwiftUI, and I hope to use it more and more as time goes by.
It's interesting to me because when we speak to developers, I think an awful lot of people are both excited and frustrated by SwiftUI at the same time, right?
True.
And it seems like it's gotten a lot better, and there are a lot more components available for people to use. So it is moving forward relatively quickly. It hasn't been around all that long. I guess there are apps that can be built fully in it, but is it ready for prime time in terms of, I don't know, maybe I know it's hard to quantify this, but your typical app, whether that's on iOS or the Mac, in terms of just kind of standard controls, something that's not doing a lot of custom work, but something that is a little more complex than a simple one action utility.
Yeah, I would say it's totally usable already. It's been for quite a while. There are many apps out there which use SwiftUI primarily. You can mix, and there are many developers who have this opinion basically that you should not mix UIKit and SwiftUI because then it's only going to make things worse. But I completely disagree with that view. I think that the best way nowadays to use SwiftUI is to actually mix UIKit and SwiftUI and use them for what they're good for. And basically the way I approach it in my projects which use SwiftUI is to use SwiftUI for the individual components, but assemble the screens using UIKit or AppKit in the case of macOS. I think that's a good approach, given that there's a lot of pieces that are still missing in SwiftUI. But I do think that it's good for production, definitely. And Apple themselves are using SwiftUI. There are even some UIKit components that are implemented in SwiftUI internally. So as a developer, you're using a UIKit component, but the component itself is using SwiftUI, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, I do think it's good to go. The main reason why I don't use it more in places such as AirBuddy is because I still support all the way back to macOS Mojave, so I can't like rewrite the entire UI in SwiftUI. But I do have some plans for the new version that's going to launch with macOS Monterey, where I will be introducing some new features which are going to be implemented in SwiftUI, and those are just not going to be available when running in Mojave.
All right, before we wrap up the show, Gui, one last question for you. Is there anything you would have liked to see this year at WWDC that did not happen? Anything in particular that you wished Apple did and that maybe you would like to see next year?
Yeah, I've been asking for the same things for quite a while, actually. And I was actually...
Us too.
Yeah, I was actually checking out my wish list from WWDC by Sandel here, because I do have some wishes there which haven't quite been met yet. So one that I've always asked for, I think for quite a while, is the ability for apps to offer custom extension points in the app itself, so that I, as a developer, could let other developers offer basically kind of like plugins for my app. So an example I gave, I think last year, was in Chibi Studio, I have this color picker where you can pick colors for items. What if I could offer a plugin interface for that, and then Steve could offer Pastel as like a color picker for Chibi Studio. That would be kind of cool. And that's just one example. So I think there's a lot that could be done there. So custom extension points is my big wish list item that has not been fulfilled yet.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought. I mean, that would be, it seems like that's the sort of thing that is in line with what Apple's been doing in terms of making apps more atomic pieces that can be fit together in different ways. They just haven't done it where it's been third-party app to third-party app at this point, which would be, seems like a natural extension to me.
Yeah, you only get system-defined extension points like sharing stuff, and yeah, so you don't get custom ones.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Guy. It's been really a pleasure to talk to you today. It's always a delight to kind of dig into all this nerdy detail with somebody, especially since we didn't have a chance the last couple of years to talk to you and others in person. So it's been a lot of fun talking to you. Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, everybody. That's it for this week's episode of App Stories. I want to thank our two sponsors again, and that is Concepts and Memberful. Of course, you can find me and Federico over at macstories.net. Federico is on Twitter and Instagram, where he's at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.